This is Father Bonaventure Chapman.
And this is Father Patrick Briscoe.
And welcome to Godsplaining. Thanks to all those who support us. If you enjoy the show, please consider making a monthly donation on Patreon. Be sure to like and subscribe to Godsplaining wherever you listen to your podcasts. Well, dear Godsplaining listeners and viewers, this is a special Guestsplaining episode, and we're happy to have with us Professor Daniel McInerny. So, Professor, thank you for joining us.
Oh, Father, it's a thrill for me to be with you this evening. Thank you.
Okay, well, I'll give some details about you, some information, but then we'll hear more from you about things. So Professor McInerny is a native of South Bend. There's a Catholic school out there. He's a graduate of that Catholic school in English, Notre Dame, Our Lady's University, and then transferred to an even better Catholic school, the Catholic University of America, where he did his MA and PhD in philosophy. And now he's an associate professor of philosophy at Christendom College out in beautiful Virginia with a nice new chapel, although I want to say a cathedral, what looks like there. But he's also involved, so he lives in Virginia area with a family, and not only does philosophy and other things, but also writes some fiction. So Professor McInerny, maybe our viewers and our listeners might be familiar with some of your work and some of your family. But what is it that you're up to? What is your project out there, and what keeps you busy these days?
Well, two things generally. As you said, I'm a professor of philosophy at Christendom College in Front Royal. I'm also serving presently as chair of the department for my sins, and so those duties keep me pretty busy. I love Christendom College. Of all the Catholic institutions you just mentioned, in my heart, it's the best of them all. It's a wonderful, wonderful community. I love our students, love my teaching, love my colleagues, just proud and honored to be there. But when I'm not teaching, prepping classes, and avoiding my grading, as you said, I'm writing fiction. So in March of this year, I published this novel, The Good Death of Kate Montclair, which we might talk about as we go on. I also am a dramatist, so I write stage drama as well, and all that keeps me pretty busy.
Well, I wanna jump in with the first question then, though Father Patrick has plenty, because there's between philosophy and dramatists and fiction writing and all of this, and since you're a philosopher, I know you're going to love this, and a historical philosopher, I suspect too, is of course Plato in the Republic. As many of our listeners might know, was not entirely sold on drama and the arts, especially the poets and such. So, in fact, some would say that he wanted to ban them from the good city. But you are a practitioner of the arts, especially with drama. So, how does philosophy and drama, how do those come together, and why are they both important?
Yeah, that's a great question. And as it happens, I was just yesterday to my freshmen in my Introduction to Philosophy course teaching the third book of the Republic, where Socrates and his friends in the dialogue are really digging into this issue of the poets and what poetry, if any, should we admit into the ideally just city. So that's a lot on my mind. But I'm not a Platonist when all is said and done. I'm an Aristotelian on these matters. So I have a very positive view of imagery and of story. I think you can make an argument that Plato did too. He says in book 3 and in book 10, he leaves the door open for a kind of storytelling that does promote the virtues, simply put. And he issues an invitation for anyone who wants to come along and give a good defense of poetry to come along and make it, and he's willing to listen. And I've always thought of Aristotle's Poetics in particular as a response to that invitation. So that's a start to that answer. It really comes down to the power of the image and its story.
Now, your father, of course, is an extremely accomplished and very highly regarded philosopher, especially by Thomas of many different stripes. One poet that he and I both love very deeply is Paul Claudel. And I wonder how much, I look at your CV here and look at some of your projects. I wonder if you might if you might share with us how much of that is due to your father's influence, or what kind of encouragement he might have offered to these pursuits.
Yeah, you mean just creative writing in general, or that and
Absolutely.
philosophy?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, well, the whole thing. He did encourage me, even as a little boy. I would see him in um, his not very attractive basement office in our house on Portage Avenue in South Bend, Indiana. It was kind of an unfinished basement, and he had a chair next to the heating system that blew very loudly. But he did tremendous work there, and I would see him writing on his old black Royal typewriter. And he would set me up on a stool and give me his second best typewriter and paper, and wait for it, carbon paper, and I would imitate him. I would write stories. So um, he encouraged me, more by example, and by giving me opportunities more than anything else. Um, in philosophy, it's a little bit of a different story. There was certainly, believe it or not, no explicit encouragement on his part to say major in philosophy, which I didn't, much less go to graduate school. That desire came certainly from my genes, and certainly from witnessing his example. But he was as surprised as anyone. I remember going to his office one day at Notre Dame and telling him I was interested in graduate school, and he faked a heart attack. I mean, because it came just out of the blue.
Hmm.
But his example was certainly a tremendous influence.
Okay. Professor McInerny, I want to talk about the book at some point, because the title is just The Good Death of Kate Montclair. You might think, well, how could it's a book about death from by and this book looks friendly. But before I do that, just a general point, it seems like Catholics have always been interested in the arts, with the kind of an imagination, and you talked about the images and such. Why do you think that the Catholic imagination is so important, or why do you think that the arts, say the Museum at the Vatican, or say just the aesthetics of the Mass and the history of the Catholic Church, why, when you've taught philosophy of art for a while, I suspect, and thought, and you're an artist yourself, um, and you're a Catholic, so what is it about Catholics, the Catholic genius, you could say, that lends itself so closely to arts in a way that, say, maybe some of our Protestant brethren or others might not be so conducive towards it?
Sure, sure. I think it's our appreciation of the fact that we're embodied spirits, and that we come to
Mhm.
know the truth, uh, first of all, through our senses, as Aristotle and St. Thomas teach us. And we don't know anything. We have no ideas whatsoever that don't come to us initially from the senses and through our imagination. So, what we do with art is we simply exploit our
Mhm.
natural knowing apparatus, you might say, and we craft images of our own that are vehicles for our knowing the world. So it really comes down to our embodied nature more than anything else. And
Mhm.
these are themes that I develop. Another book I'll mention that will be
Hmm.
appearing in June 2024, a work of philosophy, is called The Way of Beauty, a philosophical reflection on the arts. And that's going to
Hmm.
appear from Bishop Barron's Word on Fire ministry, Word on Fire
Oh, great.
Academic. He has a new line of scholarly books. So your viewers might want to look out for that.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, excellent. And then if I could just ask one more, this is a similar question, a little bit different though. Just as we're introducing the good death of Kate Montclair here, what is it, Professor, that you think makes a good work of fiction? What were some of the constitutive elements that you thought this work, which you're penning, had to have?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the most important elements of great fiction, which I wouldn't separate in one sense from great Catholic fiction. I'm going to steal from the great Catholic novelist Evelyn Waugh,
Hmm.
who, at least as his career went on, endeavored to portray human beings and human action, um, always under the eye of God, so to speak. That um, he wanted to write a fiction that told the human story, but the human story it's a theodrama. It's a drama of our quest for the divine. And I think any story that does not incorporate that element somehow is going to be lacking something. And
Mhm.
as Catholics, we can say humbly but proudly that we have the fullness of the truth. We are offered the gift of knowing the fullness of that story. And the more that you can incorporate it, the more that we writers can incorporate it into our own stories, I think the richer, more beautiful, and truer our stories will be.
That's a that's a really good point for authorship in general. That in some ways the true story, just like the true Christ is the logos, revelation reveals the logic of the world. In a sense, he also reveals the story of the world, the drama. I should say. I'm going to fight the urge to speak entirely about Hans Josef Balthasar here with all the theodrama reference. I love him, but that the drama of the world has also been portrayed there, and so our best pieces. It's interesting, of course, that so many Catholic novels and things can not feel very spectacular as works of literature. I think it's hard to do saints movies, for instance. But maybe we'll
Of
come back to
course,
that
yeah.
because I don't want to waste any more time getting into this book that you've written, this novel, "The Good Death of Kate Montclair." And you might think today it might be darn timely because that sounds like a non sequitur to our society. The good death, because how could a death
Yes.
be good? Isn't death ultimately evil? So tell us a little about maybe what why this book? What is this all about without giving the spoiler alerts and all these sort of things, so our
Sure.
listeners can take it. Who's it for? What's it about? And what do you have to say about this
Yeah.
exceptional book?
Well, thank you. I'm very pleased that you keyed on that phrase in the title, "Good Death." Um, there is there's something of a philosophical, indeed theological sort of pun there, because of course that's the literal meaning of euthanasia, uh,
Hmm.
a good death. But we also, as Catholics, we have a rich theological understanding of making a good death. And I wanted both of those understandings of that phrase in tension in the title. And I think you're picking
Hmm.
up on that,
Yeah.
and I love it. The Good Death of Kate Montclair features as a protagonist a woman in middle age. She's 55 years old, Kate Montclair, and she's just received a terminal diagnosis. She has brain cancer. It's inoperable. Um, there's nothing to be done. She learns this at the very beginning of the story. And it's not a spoiler to say, because I say it in the title, she dies. There is
Shocker.
shocker. There is no miraculous cure. That's not what the
Yeah.
story is. The story is, how does this woman approach her death? She had Catholic parents, but you couldn't even say she really had a Catholic formation. It's almost generous to say she's a fallen away Catholic. Just very little going on in her Catholic understanding, no other religious understanding whatsoever. But she has something of a philosophical soul. And so immediately when she receives her diagnosis, her thoughts go to, what's the meaning of my life? What does all of this add up to? And she doesn't have an answer to that question. And the novel, in a way, is her attempt to answer that question. Her first attempt to answer that question takes her into what you can call a death discussion group. It's kind of like a book club, uh, but they come together not to talk about books, but to talk about death. And in the novel, I call it the Death Symposium, but
Hmm.
it's modeled after something that truly exists.
Hmm.
Reviewers can look it up. It's called the Death Cafe, and it started in Europe, and it exists in the United States as well. And total strangers meet in coffee shops, and they talk about the things that our culture doesn't like to talk about. How to
Hmm.
die, And it's an interesting phenomenon. When I first came across it, um, I was both horrified and um, and impressed by what I
Hmm.
saw, because on the one hand, here are people getting together again, total strangers, to talk about the most important thing. So as a philosopher and believer, that cheered me, but it also horrified me, because the very existence of such a discussion group means that these people really don't have a culture that helps them come to terms with death. They kind of have to make it up
Hmm.
as they go along. And that's the situation that Kate Montclair is in. She's not the kind of person who goes to discussion groups about death in coffee shops, even given her terminal diagnosis. But as it happens, this particular discussion group is moderated by one of her oldest friends, a woman named Adele Schrader, who she hasn't seen in many years. And it's Adele, once she finds out about Kate's diagnosis, who entices her to begin to think about euthanasia, which, where Kate lives in Virginia, is against the law. So that's the basic
Hmm.
conflict that gets the story up and going.
Now, in the novel, Kate describes herself as a catastrophist, which I sort of seized because I saw immediately there something opposite one of the great ideas of Catholic fiction, which is, of course, belongs to Tolkien, which is that every good story has a kind of eucatastrophe,
Yes.
a kind of coming
Yes.
to fruition in a way that's so overpowering that goodness involves a deep reversal. Does Kate have room for that in her life as a catastrophist? Is this intended by you as an idea that's in opposition to Tolkien's understanding of eucatastrophe?
Yeah. Um, it definitely is in tension with Tolkien's idea. I don't know if I was thinking of Tolkien, at least when I drafted it. I was actually thinking more of Walker Percy's character Binks Balling in The Moviegoer,
Oh,
uh,
interesting. Oh, of
as
course.
as something more of a model there. But
Ah.
yeah, Kate very early in the story describes herself as a catastrophist, and there's even sort of a mock dictionary entry in her narration explaining what a catastrophist is. And what is it? Well, in her mind, it's somebody who has a sense that something has gone terribly wrong with the human story, that
Hmm.
there is a catastrophe, and that somehow everybody has forgotten about it or they have become numb to it. And only very few, like Kate, wonder what happened, why it happened. In short, this is the vestige of original sin and a sense of original sin in her. She doesn't use that theological category, but she knows that something went wrong with the human story, and death is the chief sign of it. And to come to terms with death is somehow to learn how to face the catastrophe. Now, at the beginning of the novel, as so far as we know, that's her attitude. Life is
Hmm.
catastrophe. You do your best to get through it. And as I was just saying, if fate deals you a terminal diagnosis, well, maybe an act of assisted suicide, of euthanasia, is the way to go. That's her attitude as we see her at the beginning. Um, but then events transpire from there.
Well, if I could
Perfect.
just ask a follow up there,
Well,
because
please.
you made the analogy between Binks and Kate, right? So Binks has a Lenny. Does Kate also have a Lenny?
Very good. I hadn't thought about that comparison, but I would certainly say yes.
Oh,
When she
beautiful.
goes to the death, when she goes to the death symposium, um, she meets not only her oldest friend Adele Schrader, but she also meets another old friend, a man named Benedict Aquila, and their friendship, um, which involves the solving of a mystery, which I'll leave to those who would like to read it. their friendship helps Kate think about life, uh, not merely as a catastrophe. I'm not trying to spoil too much, but
Yeah,
Benedicta
exactly.
plays a key role, and there's another character as well who I think plays that kind of role, giving a perspective other than that of the
Mhm.
catastrophist.
Okay, this is great, and I think timely because I mean, well, it's been for the last 50 years maybe. I remember reading when I was training as a Anglican seminarian, I was doing work on thanatology and Christian thanatology, the study of death, logic of death, and I was reading Ernst Becker's Denial of Death. He's a psychiatrist. I think a psychiatrist, or maybe no, I think a psychiatrist, not a psychologist. And it was talking about how in the 70s America just didn't, in the West in general, like just didn't talk about death. This wasn't a
Right.
thing we cared about. We had Kubler-Ross, so we talked a little bit about the stages, but that was to ignore it. And I don't think that 50 years later we've gotten any better at death. That we
No.
still like keep it away from us. If someone's gonna, we put people in nursing homes. We don't have people dying around. We don't talk about it. That the
Right.
mere condition of the possibilities you say of these death symposiums and death cafes is that no
Right.
one is actually dealing with this. I suspect is the kind of current milieu and this not talking about this, or just the philosophical and theological confusions about it, was that one of the reasons that you thought this would be a good book to write, or is that just a happy coincidence or situation, or did you have like is there? I mean, art is for its own sake in a way; it's per se, but this is a super important topic, I think, that Americans should talk
Sure.
about, whether Christian or not.
Right, right. No, it was very much on my mind, and I appreciate how you put it, which I think is exactly right. A work of art is for itself. It
Mhm.
it's not just a weapon to be used in a culture war. Nonetheless, a writer cannot help but be influenced by the cultural currents that are swirling all around him, and I certainly am. I don't think we really live in a coherent culture anymore.
Mhm.
I'm happy to follow Patrick Deneen and others and call it an anti-culture.
Mhm.
And the rise of euthanasia is certainly a part of that. And so, yeah, my story is a response to that
Mhm.
situation, not as a political speech, not as a homily. It is a work of art trying to capture um, the direness of our cultural moment. I I feel for my protagonist, Kate Montclair.
Yeah.
She's dying, and she doesn't know what to do with the, the most important predicament a human being can land himself in.
Well,
And so, yes, all that was very, very much on my
I'm just going to steal from Father Patrick for a second. So he took advantage too, because I want to follow up this with this particularly solving this problem or answering questions through art about most important matters. I remember I used to work at Barnes and Noble, and I remember someone coming in one time and asking for looking for a book, and I've never forgotten this. I said, well, what's the book? You know, what kind of book it is? Book is it? Is it fiction or nonfiction? You kind of do the Porphyrian
mind.
tree as best you can. So you can divide the store in half, but that way at least. And I said, "Is it fiction or nonfiction?" And she said, "Well, which one's the true one?" And I said to her, "A part of me died, but I get it." And I said, "Well, that's the fiction section. They tell truths. If you want random facts about stuff, that'll be in nonfiction.
Oh,
Which
I
one?"
love it.
You know, but I deeply,
That's a
I teach
beautiful answer. I'm going to steal that one. I
You
love it.
should. I teach because I teach philosophy of art as well. And there's something to. So, well, put it this way: you have a truth to speak here, and I think the greatest truths are felt through the spirit. And I think art is the lowest level of that kind of spiritual experience of the human
Mhm.
condition. Um, what is it about a novel about death that is a better way of getting at this problem of our culture than say an essay, a philosophical treatise, or something like what is it so what's so powerful about this way. And you say not as like a bludgeon, or not as like a utilitarian kind. This is the best way to take your. It's like taking a pill and putting it in applesauce or something like a kid. No, but the artistic thing. How does that get at the truth of how we should respond or think about ourselves?
Yeah. Wow. There's a lot there we could talk about.
Mm.
One big idea here that we should throw into the mix is that, and I talk about this in the philosophy book I mentioned earlier, The
Mm-hmm.
Way of Beauty, is that stories are arguments. I think you may have been thinking in your question about St. Thomas's prologue to his commentary on Aristotle's posterior analytics,
Mm.
where he places poetry among the arts of logic. So St. Thomas is thinking of poetry,
Mm-hmm.
we could say more broadly, storytelling, as a kind of argument. But it's not the most compelling sort of argument to the intellect, but it is the most compelling argument
Mm-hmm.
to us as embodied spirits who, as we were talking about earlier, who learn from the senses and our imagination. We, being the kind of beings we are made especially for the sorts of arguments that address us as rational animals, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who are made for sensible beauty, leading us to supersensible beauty. So a story is just hits us. Our philosophical love of truth and of argument, coming from the senses and with images. I mean, that's a sandwich that we just cannot resist as
Yeah.
human beings. And so when it comes to the wider cultural argument, I don't think that there's any more persuasive approach than storytelling or what we might call poetic knowledge.
Mm-hmm. Right.
One of the details, just for my last question, one of the details that I love from the book is Kate's selected epitaph, her motto, her slogan for her tombstone, right? Which is acceptable with alterations. Acceptable
Right.
with alterations, right? And I wonder, Professor, have you given thought to what your epitaph will be?
Oh gosh. I can't say that I have, but with each passing day, it seems I should be thinking about that more and more.
I just think it's a great
Maybe
kind of personal question, for
Yeah.
someone to
no, it
pause and think,
is.
no, what do I want?
Yeah.
I'll get like a cross in the ground, so I won't get to choose anything. But but if
Well,
I
I
could
sure
choose something,
right. I sure spent a lot of time thinking of Kate's, and so I'm attracted to that one.
Mm.
I think to fully explain it, I might have to give some spoilers, but that's a phrase she
Mm-hmm.
takes.
no,
She was
certainly not.
a career she was a career high school English teacher, and so when she would grade drafts of student essays, if it was pretty good but still needed work, she would write at the bottom acceptable but with alterations, and the student would have to go back. She puts that on her tombstone. She's achieved a certain level, but there's still some work toward perfection. Um, uh, we should all aim for sainthood, though, so I don't know if I want to choose that one for myself.
Yeah. Well, that is the aim in life, the goal of our lives is saints. I love the story of Thomas Merton in his the Seven Story Mountain, where he talks about he's become a Catholic, and one of his friends, Rob Lax, says, "Well, what are you going to do now?" And he says, "Oh, what do you want to be?" And he says, "Oh, I guess just a good Catholic." And Lax says, "That's not what you should say. You should say." And he says, "Well, what am I supposed to say? The good Catholic seems right." He says, "You should say you want to be a saint."
Yes,
And he says,
yes,
this seems insane and wild. And he said, "Why? How could I do that? How do you do that?" And Lax says, "By wanting to be one, because
there you
God has
go.
made you to be that." And it's terrifying to think about the sainthood, but as it's even more terrifying to think about the other option, because
Indeed.
there's only two. You only get two. And so if you don't want to do the saint one, you get the other one. But Professor McInerny, it's been an absolute pleasure. But before we go, And this book, Good Death of Kate Montclair, is available obviously at the standard kind of sites things. But where else can people look to find your work, to get in touch with you, to this philosophy of art book is coming out as well. Give us some places where our viewers and our listeners can get into your material and to follow you a bit.
Thank you very much. The novel is available everywhere. The publisher is Chrism Press, which I highly recommend to your viewers. They can buy it direct from Chrism as well. And yes, the philosophically inclined can look out for my book, The Way of Beauty, from Word on Fire Academic in June 2024. But I do also write a Substack, and that's kind of my main online base. And I call it the Comic Muse. And you can find it at danielmcinerny.substack.com, or just search on the Comic Muse or my name, and you should find it. It's a free subscription at most for most of the posts these days. And I write on all sorts of issues on that. I'm also interested in technology, so I write a lot about the philosophy of technology, about art, about beauty, about writing, about culture. So it's all in there. I try to post about once a week.
Oh, you're a busy man, but as people say, if you want something done, find a busy person, because they know how to get things moving. That's great, and we'll put that down in our show notes as well, so people can find you and find your material. And I think it'll be a great chance for them to expand their artistic imagination, which is, as we say, the Catholic imagination. So thanks so much for coming on with us.
Thank you, Father Bonaventure, Father Patrick. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks again also to all our supporters. If you'd like to tithe or pay or contribute to our work, check us out at patreon.com/Godsplaining. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, is that X now? Instagram. Like, subscribe, leave a 5-star review, or those sort of things. Visit godsplaining.org to shop our merch and get dates and information for upcoming Godsplaining events. So that's it from us here. Please know of our prayers for you, and please pray for us, and we catch you next time on Godsplaining.